Hello everyone and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session. My name is Annette Gell and I'm a Quality Operations and Training Manager at 4R Pharma Limited. And I'm very happy to have you here with me for this short session today on GMP, GDP and GCP. And we're going to try and demystify the G's in pharmaceutical compliance. When people first come into pharmaceutical industry, the G's can feel as a separate language or quite overwhelming. We hear the GMP, GDP, GCP, GXP, and sometimes GLP, and it can quickly become a wall of abbreviations. But the aim of today's session is not to make it about a regulatory lecture, but to look at it from a practical point of view and simplify it. We are going to look at, excuse me, at what each G is trying to protect, where it sits in the product life cycle, and how the three areas connect in real working situations. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I will focus on the three main questions. The first one is, what does each G actually mean in the plain language? The second question, what evidence do regulators and quality teams expect to see? And third, where do risks appear when clinical, manufacturing, and distribution activities meet? The session is aimed at you, pharmaceutical professionals, who may work mainly in one area, but you still need to understand the wider compliance picture. You may be in QA, production, a distribution part, or even clinical operations or regulatory affairs, supply chain or training. And you may simply want to be building your confidence in GXP terminology. So please feel free to add questions or comments in the comments section of this webinar as we go along, and I will respond to them after the webinar. The main message I would like you to take away today is that the G's are not there to make work difficult. They are there to protect patients, protect quality, and protect the reliability of decisions that we make. So let's start. Why do G's matter? It is very easy to see GXP as a bureaucracy, a red tape, or something unnecessarily difficult. Forms, SOPs, signatures, training records, deviations, the change controls, audit trails, and review checklists can sometimes feel like a paperwork just for the sake of the paperwork. But that is not what GXP is for. In the simple terms, or the simplest terms, a GXP is the evidence that the right thing happened at the right time and for the right reason. And this then allows us to show that the medicine was developed ethically, that it was manufactured under control, stored correctly, and transported safely, and supported by trustworthy data. There are three core protections running through all GXP systems. The first one is the patient safety. And that means that we protect the people from unsafe, ineffective, or poor quality products. The second one is product quality. And here we need the confidence that the product has been made, tested, stored, and handled in the way that maintains its approved quality. And the third core protection, of course, is the data integrity, because decisions in pharma are only as good as the data behind them. So we need to be able to trust our records. They must be accurate, complete, attributable, and available when needed. And this is why documentation matters so much here. A batch may have been made correctly, but if the batch record is incomplete, then the evidence of that correct manufacture is weak. A shipment may have stayed within temperature, but if the temperature data are missing, delayed or unclear, then your decisions are becoming difficult. A trial visit that may have happened, but if the source data doesn't support the case report form, then the credibility of your trial results will be challenged. So the message here is this: if it affects the patient, the product, or the data, then it definitely needs control. And that is what we can call the common thread across the GMP, GDP, and GCP. Okay, so let's have a look at the simple map of the product life cycle. And each G focuses on different stage, but they are all working towards the same outcome, and that is a patient who is expecting to receive a medicine that is safe, effective, and of required quality. So GCP stands for good clinical practice. It applies to all clinical trials and focuses on two essential questions. The first one is, were the rights, the safety, and the well-being of the trial participants protected? Okay. And then we have the second question: are the clinical trial data credible enough to support the decisions about the medicine? Two important questions when it comes to GCP. Then we move to GMP. GMP stands for good manufacturing practice. It applies to manufacture, testing, and release of the product. And it asks whether the medicine was made, tested, and released under control, and whether we can demonstrate that it meets the approved quality requirements. And the third G, of course, is GDP. GDP stands for good distribution practice. It applies to the process after the manufacture and during storage, transport, and supply. It asks whether the medicine remained within the required conditions and whether its quality was protected all the way through its supply chain. Useful way to remember this is that GCP helps to prove that the medicine is suitable to use in humans. GMP helps make that medicine correctly, and GDP helps to move and supply the medicine correctly without losing its quality, its safety, and efficacy. Of course, in real life, these areas are not completely separate. You can have investigational medicinal products, for example, that sit right across all three because they are used in clinical trials under the GCP, but they are manufactured under GMP and moved through a controlled supply chain under your GDP principles. And that is why understanding the handovers between the three areas is very important. Now, we will look at the GMP, or make it right, a little bit closer now. Good manufacturing practice controls how medicines and active substances are manufactured, tested, and released. It's not about what happens on the production line. GMP includes the pharmaceutical quality system, quality risk management, your premises and equipment, utilities, suppliers, materials, laboratory controls, basically all of your chapters of UDRALEX Volume 4 and all the relevant annexes, of course. And the core question behind GMP is, can we demonstrate that this product was manufactured under control and meets the approved quality requirements? And the word demonstrate is very important here, because GMP is not just about doing the right thing. It's about being able to show through reliable records that the right thing was done. For example, if your tablet batch is compressed, filled, packed, or tested, there should be a clear record of what happened at each stage, who performed the work, what equipment was used, whether the required checks were completed, and whether the results meet specification. Take the example I have here on a slide. We have a tablet compression process that begins to drift out of range. Under GMP, we don't just simply adjust the machine and carry on without thinking. What we need to do, we need to understand what happened. Was there an equipment issue? Was there a material issue? What has caused the compression drift that now we are out of slightly out of range? Was the process parameter outside of the validated range? Could the batch quality be affected? Because we need to do an impact assessment and then think, do we need additional testing, a deviation to investigate, and then potentially a kappa? Do we need to look at previous batches or trends? Okay, so the risk-based thinking here is at the forefront. What could be the impact of this? So it's not just as simple, just adjusting a machine and carrying on without really thinking what has happened. Typical GMP evidence includes batch manufacturing records, specifications, analytical results, your validation reports, change control, training files, QP release documentations, just to mention a few. And the main regulatory anchors include your EU GMP Volume 4, FDA 21 CFR Part 210 and 211, your PICS GMP guides, ICHQ guidances on quality risk management, and pharmaceutical quality system ICHQ 9 and 10 respectively. Okay, now let's move to GDP, or move it right. Good distribution practice protects the product quality after the manufacture and during the supply chain. This is sometimes underestimated because people may think the hard work is done once the product is manufactured and released. But a medicine can be made perfectly under GMP and it could still fail at the patient level if it's stored incorrectly, transported in poor conditions, mixed with unauthorized stock, or exposed to falsification risks, and supplied without traceability. So the core GDP question here should be, can we demonstrate that the product remained authorized, traceable, and within required conditions throughout the storage and transport? GDP includes supplier and customer qualification, transport provider oversight, your warehouse controls, temperature mapping, temperature monitoring, route risk assessments, your lane qualification, securities, recall arrangements, then you have your returns and complaints, and protection against falsified medicines. We have an example here. You have a refrigerated medicine that has been delayed at the border. So the transport is sitting at the border and is being delayed. And our question shouldn't only be, oh, did it arrive late? The quality question should be a lot wider. What happened to the product during that delay? Do we have a continuous appropriate temperature evidence? Was there any excursions? Is the packaging qualified for the extra duration, whatever that duration was? Was the route risk assessed? Is our data reliable? And who is authorized to make the quality decisions before the product supply goes further? And the typical GDP records include your warehouse maps, temperature logs, your route risk assessments, transport contracts, qualification files, recall tests, supplier qualification records, and returned goods assessment. GDP matters because medicines move through complex networks, especially today. The supply chain has become a lot more complex. They need to be managed. They need to be coordinated to provide seamless transfer from one end to the other. Manufacturers, wholesalers, third-party logistics providers, or healthcare customers may be involved in this complex network. But the very important point here I would like to stress is that even if the work is outsourced, your responsibility and accountability is not. The company, you must still have the oversight, and you have to have the documented decision trail because you ultimately are responsible for your product. Key regulatory anchors include EU GDP guidelines for medicinal products and EU GDP guidance for active substances and the national wholesale requirements. And then we move to GCP, or prove it right. Good clinical practice protects the trial participants and the credibility of clinical trial data. This is very important distinction here because GCP is not only about data and it's not only about ethics. It's about both in equal measure. And the core question we should be asking here is, can we demonstrate that the trial was ethical, scientifically sound, and that we have the data that is credible? And the first duty in GCP is to the people taking part in the trial. Their rights, their safety, and their well-being comes first. That means we need to have informed consent. It must be obtained properly, and the trial participation must be voluntary. Safety information must be monitored and reported, and the trial must be reviewed and approved by the appropriate ethics and regulatory bodies. The second duty here is the credibility of the data. Okay, clinical trial results may support decisions about whether a medicine can be authorized, how it should be used, and what safety information should be included. If the data is unreliable or incomplete or poorly controlled, then the decisions that are based on that data will be unsafe and unreliable. So let's have an example that I have here on a slide for you guys. You have a protocol that is required for safety assessment is missed. And under the GCP, that is not just an administrative issue, it is a big gap. So the first question is whether the subject may have been placed at risk. Excuse me. And then we need to assess the protocol deviation, document what happened, and notify and escalate if required. That would involve the sponsor. And then we need to consider what the corrective and preventive actions should be if needed. Your typical GCP records include the protocol, the informed consent forms, source documents, monitoring reports, safety reports, and investigational medicinal product accountability records, and also your trial master file. The key regulations are the ICH E6, R3, which is a good clinical practice guide, or EU clinical trials regulation, and your Udrolex volume 10, which is clinical trials guideline. Let's have a look now at how the three GCs differ. I have a comparison slide here, which is a useful one to see, because many people work mainly in one part of the product life cycle. and may not be aware of the connections with the others and the interdependencies. You may work in a manufacturing and hear about GCP only occasionally, or you may work in clinical operations and only see GMP when discussing investigational medicine or product supply, or you may work in distribution and only deal with GDP. And the easiest way to separate the three and look at them is to look at the main focus and the evidence, as you can see on the slide. So we have a GCP, where the focus is the clinical trials. The primary question is whether the participants were protected and whether the data are credible. Okay, its evidence includes protocol, informed consent forms, and the source data and the trial master file. Then you have the GMP focus. That focuses on manufacturing and testing. Its primary question is whether the product was made and tested under control. And your evidence is your batch record, your QC data, validation reports, and a release record. And then GDP focuses on storage and supply. Its primary question is whether quality was protected after release. Its evidence includes temperature data, root risk assessments, traceability information, and your recall records. At this point, it is worth asking yourselves a question of which one of the areas touches my daily role most often. Is it GMP? Is it GDP, GCP, or is it all three? The reason I would ask this is that most of us have one home area, but we often depend on the other area without even realizing it. A QP may depend on a supplier and the transport evidence. A clinical team may depend on the IMP manufacturing and labeling records. Your distribution team may depend on the product stability information from the manufacturing and the regulatory files. So the three Gs do differ, but they need each other, and their behaviors in essence are the same. They're clear responsibilities, controlled processes, trained people, reliable records, and a quality oversight. So where do the three Gs, GMP, GDP, and GCP overlap? A good example would be a clinical trial supply. An investigational medicine or product is manufactured and packaged under GMP. It is shipped, stored, and distributed using the GDP principles. And then it is handled, dispensed, and administered, and everything is documented under the clinical trial under GCP. So one product you can see can therefore move through all three GXP areas before it reaches the trial participant. Now, think about what could go wrong at the handover points between the individual G areas, like your GMP, GDP, and GCP. So the clinical team may assume the product is available and ready. Okay. The manufacturing team may assume the distribution conditions are understood. The logistics provider may assume the site knows how to store it. And the site may assume that the temperature data were reviewed centrally. If ownership is unclear, small gaps that are filled with assumptions can become significant compliance risks. There we have another example, which is a temperature excursion involving trial medication. GDP evidence may be needed to show the time and a temperature profile. GMP product knowledge may be needed to assess the product stability and the quality impact. So if you did have temperature excursion, your GMP product knowledge will be able to say whether you can still use the product or whether the product is no good because of the knowledge from the GMP part of the process. GCP assessment may be needed to consider whether any trial participants were affected, whether dosing was impacted, and whether a protocol deviation and safety concerns now exist. And data integrity is the one point that cuts across all three Gs here. Whether we are looking at the batch record, a shipment log, or a temperature trace, source data, or an electronic audit trail, the decision trail must be reliable. And regulators, they don't look at as just the final answer. They look how the answer was reached. And I always think this is very similar to your maths exam, when you are expected to show your workings, how you got to the results that you got from your calculations, because the examiner wants to see how the student got the answer and not just the final number at the end. So of course, again, that working is the data behind it. Just like for us, we need the data to prove that that the final answer is reliable. So the key message here I would like to say is that the risk often lives between the departments. When responsibilities pass from one team to another, the handover must be clear. It must be documented and have clear ownership and responsibilities assigned. And that is the key part to stop the issues in your handover parts. Let's have a look at the common pitfalls that create the potential GXP risks here. Important point is that most GXP issues are not caused by one missing document in isolation or an operator error, or as we like to call it, human error. They are usually caused by weak systems, unclear ownership, or unclear process escalation. So the first pitfall I would like to talk about is the G thinking, if you like to call it. And this is what happens when the teams treat GMP, GDP, and GCP as completely separate worlds. For example, supply chain issue may be seen as GDP only, even though it may affect GMP product quality assessment and the GCP subject impact. So when teams stay just inside the little label and not being aware of or understanding the bigger picture, then your handover risks are missed and compliance gaps will appear. The second pitfall is poor documentation. Decisions are made, but the evidence and the rationale are not captured clearly. In an inspection, this is not enough to say we discussed it and decided it was acceptable. This is not enough to write in your investigation, because it will not hold in real crisis. The record needs to show what was reviewed, who made the decision, why the decision was justified, and what follow-up was required. So your documentation here is your evidence, your records are your evidence, what you've done. So do not underestimate it. If you say, we risk assessed it and the result was like this, you need to be able to show that you've done the risk assessment and that you've documented it on electronically or on paper. You need to have evidence of that risk assessment, not just to say that you've done it. The third pitfall is a weak supplier oversight. Okay, as I said, many activities are now outsourced in pharma, even manufacturing, testing, storage or transport, or even monitoring of your clinical trial services. And many companies think when they outsource part of the process, they are not responsible. But as I've said, accountability cannot be outsourced. So you are still responsible and accountable for that part of the life cycle. So if the contractor performs the work, the sponsor or the MAH or the responsible company still need to have the appropriate oversight because you are accountable. The fourth pitfall is a training, when the training is used as a tick box exercise. And I have seen this so many times that people complete an SOP training, but they still don't know why they're doing certain things. An effective training should help people apply the requirements in real situations and provide the understanding why they are doing what they are doing, and not just because the SOP says so. And the fifth pitfall is, of course, the late escalations. Small signals are sometimes ignored or managed informally, and then they become bigger problems. The early uncertainty is raised, and the more options, the earlier you raise your uncertainty, the more options you have. And of course, this is related to your training and the process setup. And then the final is your data integrity gaps, which is if you have incomplete, inconsistent, or backfilled, hard to reconstruct records, they will undermine the confidence, even when the technical decision may have been correct. So the behavior I would like to encourage here is very simple. Raise your uncertainty early, document honestly, and involve the right quality decision maker. To do this, of course, you need clear process pathways, and they need to be documented, they need to be trained out effectively and reviewed regulatory for compliance. Here I've got a very simple decision guide, a practical one that you can use. You don't need to memorize every regulations to know when to escalate. I think what you need to do, you follow the risk. So you ask the first question: does this affect how a product is made, tested, or released? If yes, you are likely in the GMP territory. Then you ask, does this affect storage, transport, or traceability of supply? If your answer is yes, you are in a GDP. That could include temperature controls, warehouse conditions, route delays. And then you have the question, does this affect trial participants, consent or protocol compliance, or my clinical data? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, it's GCP is involved. And this could include your consents, your safety reporting, your source data, your monitoring, and your trial master files completeness. And finally, does this affect electronic records, decisions, or evidence? If the answer to that question is yes, data integrity applies across all of your GXP. And this includes your audit trails, your access controls, missing records, overwritten data, uncontrolled spreadsheets, late entries, or information that cannot be reconstructed. The point of this guide is not to make everyone a specialist in every area, so in every G part, but the main point is to help people recognize when a situation may involve one of the GXP impacts and when to bring in the right expertise. So if the answer is yes to any of the questions on the slide, do not, or if you don't know exactly what the answer is, do not guess. Escalate, assess impact, and document your decision trail. Okay, in practice, that one behavior, the asking of the questions and not assuming when not sure, will prevent many compliance problems from becoming serious findings. So, What are the key takeaways I would like you to take from today's session? So the first one is that the GCP protects the trial participants and clinical data credibility. It asks you whether the trial was ethical, whether the participants were protected, and whether the data that you have can be trusted. The second takeaway I would like you to take is that the GMP protects the manufacturing, testing, control, and the release of your product. It asks the question whether the medicine was made correctly, whether it was tested appropriately, and released based on a reliable evidence. The third takeaway is that the GDP protects the product quality during storage and its distribution, and it asks whether the medicine remained traceable, authorized, and within the required conditions after it was manufactured. Fourth takeaway is that the same behaviors run across all GXPs, as we call them together. Those behaviors are your training, your effective training, your control, your documentation, your oversight, escalation, and your honest, risk-based decision-making. The regulations may be different, but the quality mindset is very similar. So rather than seeing the G's as a wall of jargon, use them as a practical map. Where are we in the life cycle would be your first question. Then what is the risk? What evidence do we need? Who owns the decision? Could this impact the patient, the product, or the data? Key questions that you can ask in your everyday work. So I would like to leave you with one reflection question, which is, which one action would strengthen your GXP handovers when you go back to your desk? Is it clarifying the ownership of the temperature excursion assessments? It could be improving your decisions, how the decisions are documented. It could be checking that the supplier oversight responsibilities are clear in your contract. Or it might be just making sure that the training goes beyond reading the SOP and signing that you read and understood without really understanding. Remember, simple improvements can make a significant difference to compliance confidence. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining today's session about the GMP, GDP, and GCP and the demystifying the G's in pharmaceutical compliance. I hope it has helped make the three areas feel clearer and more connected, because they are not just regulatory labels, they are practical systems that protect the patients, and they protect the product quality, and they protect the reliability of the evidence that we have to make the decisions. At the Academy of Pharmaceutical Excellence, we offer practical training courses that are designed to help pharmaceutical professionals apply these requirements in real situations. We have GMP Essentials training courses that cover manufacturing, documentation, deviations, and CAPAs. We have a GDP and supply chain training, and also GCP and clinical quality training courses that focus on participant protection, data credibility. If you are interested, please visit our website for the courses that we offer, or contact us for more information either on Academy of Excellence, or you can contact me directly on Aneta gel@pqs.ltd. Thank you very much again for your time today. I appreciate you joining the session. I hope you find it useful. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you at one of our future sessions. Thank you, and bye-bye.